So welcome to the Shape Gallery Westfield. If you see or if you hear a fire alarm or people alert you to a fire, it's a real fire alarm. So we will be leaving. So there's a few Shape staff like myself who will guide you out the way. Afterwards there's toilets down the back down there. And you're more than welcome to stay up to the main crypt, which will take place in there, plus there's some wine. Donations are always welcome. Okay, we are filming this event, but obviously it will just be the beautiful presenters that I have here. So without further ado, I'll introduce Sarah and Joe from Q Arts. They're going to be doing the talk on crypt, and then Karen, who's outside, will be facilitating the crypt. I'll just give you a quick brief overview about Shape. So what we are is a disability-led charity that works with disabled artists and non-disabled artists to promote their life and career as an artist. That's their summary, which the marketing people will really like how I said that. So we've got this gallery here, and we've got the artworks, as you will see, out the front. If you sign up to our mailing list, we've got an event coming up on the 23rd of October, which is the Shape Open private view, which you're more than welcome to come along to. And these networking sessions are quarterly, so the next one will be in January. So again, sign up and you'll be able to come along. So without further ado, as I said twice, I will hand it over to you two. And welcome.
Hi, I'm Jo. I work with Q Art. I've been working with Sarah since 2010 when I graduated as a mature student from my degree, my art degree. And I started working with Sarah because I think what Q Art does was pretty good and wanted to be involved in it. And I also work with children and do art projects with kids.
My name's Sarah. Hello, thank you all for coming. I set up Q Art about 6 years ago when I was a student doing my fine art degree at Goldsmiths, and I'll talk a bit more about what Q Art does shortly. I thought we'd start the session because the workshop is called Introduction to a Crit and talking about art, with firstly asking, if you could raise your hands, who has participated in a crit before or knows what the word means or has an idea of what the word means? Just by showing your hands. Okay, that's a good way to go. Okay. So then I thought I'd start with just our personal definition of what a crit is, and there are a few definitions. But what we say is a crit is a model of learning where an artist will present their work to a group to get feedback on their practice. And they will see all the different ways that an audience might read their work, interpret their work, and it will help them develop their practice further, hopefully. They're used in art schools, across various art schools all around the country. And we wanted to use the model through Q Art to firstly bring students from across different art schools together, and also allow people outside of the art school system to take part in the crit as well.
So it's basically an opportunity for everyone involved. So it's for artists to gather feedback, but it's also for the audience to be able to engage with the work and engage in discussion around that work and debate. So that's what those. So it's a kind of it is a two-way exchange rather than just an artist giving presentation of their work, but it should allow for space for the artists to look at different readings of their work.
Yeah, and then artists can also use it to think about how they display their work, how it works in that particular context, and to see whether what they're presenting is what the audience is seeing in it, if you like, or if there are any surprises in how the audience is seeing the work. So a bit about Q Art then. So Q Art is an organisation that, as I said before, was set up 6 years ago when I was a student. We run open crits once a month in different art colleges and gallery spaces across London. We also have, the crits are open for anyone to participate in, so any artist of any background. We run a first come first serve waiting list, and if anyone wants to get feedback on their work, they just drop Karen, who's outside, an email and they can do that. At the end of each academic year, we hold an exhibition at the APT Gallery in Deptford, a really nice space for all the artists who participated. We also produce a number of books, which you've got outside, which aim to demystify how the gallery system works, how the art system works, and also support people going into and through their art education as well. And we do a few workshops in schools. I think essentially the aim of QR is really to break down some of the barriers to contemporary art, break down some of the barriers to art education and support people through that process. And I personally found it quite, I didn't always know what contemporary art was, so I found it quite difficult to get into contemporary art in the first place, and that's kind of where it came from.
Yeah, so I think we both found when we were studying at university that the crits were kind of a really scary place, and that's where we kind of came together, and we realised that we were both kind of feeling this thing, that we'd sit in a crit and people would be using language that we didn't understand, and we felt like we couldn't engage with the work on our level because people were kind of, you know, having a different level of discussion. So we just started thinking about sort of ways to engage with the work, you know, so we would know a way in and to actually be able to take part in the discussion.
Yeah, so there are, I mean, crits have many benefits, which we'll talk about in a minute, but there are lots of, there's lots of anxieties that you can get around like talking about an artwork, especially in a group of people. Like you might have some fears around public speaking in a group. I did. What questions you even ask to find a way into an artwork, how do you even start that process? You might think other people in the room are at a different place to you and might know more stuff than you do. Sometimes people can act like they do, but don't necessarily, it's not necessarily always the case. I think from the perspective of having seen a lot of the barriers when we were at art school to talking about work, and from running our own crit programme and having, also realising that these exist, we did a project called Art Crits 20 Questions, where we went around the UK and we spoke to different fine art course leaders, and we asked them, we made a book and we made a video, and we asked them questions such as, what do they think the purpose of a crit is? What different models of crits exist? What names exist? How do they run them? How do they differ? What are some of the barriers that people can face to taking part in crits? And what tips do they have for helping people overcome those barriers? And what we found out from that was incredible, really. And we've got a pocket guide, this one, which is outside on the desk, which you can take a look at later. We've also got a video which we'll be playing a bit of later, and the knowledge that we gained informs the way that we run the crits and also informs the workshop that we'll be doing today.
Yeah, and I think we kind of thought that was worth doing, because obviously our initial response, I think, to a crit was to run away and just go, I can't do that, I'm not going to do it. But when we started looking into it, we really kind of realised that if it was done in the right kind of way, you could really get a lot, as artists and participants, you can really get a lot out of it. So you can learn about your own practice, you can see how other people see your work, you learn art, you learn about what other people's views about art in general. So that, that's one of the things we thought. The other thing about QR is that in art schools, obviously the crits are often, there's a tutor present, so often people are being assessed, and that can really kind of play with the dynamic and how people feel about engaging in the discussion. Whereas because QR is facilitated, but there's no actual kind of authority figure, it can be a more open discussion. People can feel a bit more relaxed.
And I think So when we do crits now, they're open to, as I said, students, they're open to graduates who can come back and continue discussing their practice. And they're open to people who are self-taught, haven't been through art schools, and also anyone outside
who maybe isn't practicing as an artist but wants to find out how art education and people talk about art and how all that works. And I think what people tend to say is it just creates a nice community and it's a good way of sustaining practice. So there are lots and lots of benefits to crits. What was I going? Yeah, so we thought that the most central part of a crit is talking about art and reading art. So we were going to do a bit quickly where we actually focus on that and look at some questions, to look at some images that we brought in and actually do a bit of a practice crit, if you like, now.
So we put this together really just to give an idea of some questions that people might ask when looking at an artwork, and also to really bring home the idea that there is no one way of reading an artwork. So everyone that comes to an artwork will have their own interpretation of that artwork, and all of those interpretations are completely valid and completely legitimate. As it says at the top, the way that we see and interpret artworks will depend on things like our gender, race, age, class, values, all of our belief systems, things that we, things that we surround ourselves with, our country of origin, our religion, family values, our everyday environment, things we've seen on TV, music, things we've watched, all the previous experience that we've had in our life will all inform the ways that we come to read images and artworks. And there are some questions that we might use when interpreting an artwork, which can be asked in any order, which can do.
Yeah, so I think first reactions are really important. So what you feel when you see the work, what your kind of emotional reaction, if you can kind of, obviously that is reliant on all the things that Sarah just listed, but not to kind of, to really kind of try and notice that and try and articulate it. And then the next thing, kind of what the work reminds you of, if it reminds you of any feelings or places or whatever, things that you can connect the work to, things that might be, just things that remind you, in the work, whether it's colours, whether it's shapes, whether it's, all those kind of things, whether it's materials that might remind you of something or you may be able to connect to. And again, the how do the materials and what the kind of stuff that the artists use, how does that how does that affect your reading of the work? What processes have they used? When was it made, basically? You can't always tell that from just looking at a work, but sometimes that is relevant as well. Sometimes the title can give us clues to what the artist might have been trying to convey. And is there a narrative, is there a story kind of attached to the work? So all those things that sometimes might feel a little bit kind of, on a basic level, they're all really kind of relevant and important things to having the first access to an artwork. So we're going to sort of think about those questions. As I say, any of those questions is not, they're just a kind of guide, there's no set order for them, but we're going to have a little look.
Does anyone recognise this piece at all? And again, do it by a show of hands, but don't shout out what it is. So yeah, if you show your hands, who does recognise it? Okay, so for the moment I don't need to say anything. For those who don't, I just wondered if people might want to respond to some of their initial. So what are your initial reactions when seeing this piece? What does it make you think about, feel? What do you think it is? Anyone can shout.
It's quite playful. Looks quite playful to me.
Playful, okay. Anything else? Can people see what it is?
No.
It's sweets.
It's like chocolate things, sweets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sweets. Chocolate.
Kind of like the suites that lots of English people use, like there's a game as well, isn't there? I don't know.
Okay.
It also looks like a bit like a pyramid, or like a mountain, maybe.
Like someone could be climbing a mountain.
Nice.
I know I'm not really into sweets, but I know most people do like sweets, so I didn't know if it's sort of like a game with all the, piling up the sweets and seeing how you can get.
So,
It might be showing the amount of sweets.
And if anyone wants to respond to those observations, and whether you think, whether you feel, whether you agree with those or whether you have a different kind of view of it, please do.
I was trying with that. The thing that struck me first is looking like a pile, and you think about which is the thing you and here now sweets maybe represents something. About eating a lot of, it represents sort of maybe it's a mess with a lot of sweets messed up, or you could be somebody eating a lot of sweets or something like that.
So is it a bit overwhelming or a bit sort of...
Yeah, so it could be meant to be, like someone feels overwhelmed, that they've got worried they've eaten too much or something. It could be sort of that idea.
They look like gems or jewels to me, the light.
yeah. So it reflects the light quite a lot.
Yeah.
It's kind of got the sense that it might cascade if you put something else on top of it, and like that sense of falling away.
So it's a little bit unstable, maybe.
Plus, the two people who said gain... sorry.
Kind of could be an advert, maybe to make people kind of attracted towards the sweets.
Easily done.
It's enticing people in.
Yeah.
So,
I'm thinking of lamp buffet.
Yeah.
it is.
That's interesting because that's almost an opposite view to the kind of jewels and the something valuable. You're thinking, a couple of people I think have suggested a pile of waste or excess or... Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think I had a similar thing. It's something like recycling, so reusing material to create something else.
Yeah.
Reusing sweets in different ways, I guess.
And maybe that's because of the sheer volume that you can see of the... Yeah.
And two people said gain, someone said gain, joy. Did you say joy?
I said playful.
Playful, yeah. Why did you say, why playful?
It looks a bit like children's toys or Christmas decorations. I mean, it's not quite in focus, so it's quite difficult to... I can't tell the detail, but it could be bits of plastic, as somebody said, like waste. But it's a bit bright and colourful for just waste.
If anyone wants to come and have a closer look, please do. It's not, again, in a crit, that sometimes you do feel like you're stuck in the space, but if you want to go and have a closer look, then just walk up and have a closer look.
Yeah, and later as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any more?
So would anyone like to comment, anyone who's actually seen the work or knows anything about the work, would they be able to come in and say anything about it?
Yeah, there was a few people who put their hand up earlier.
Couple. We're putting them on the spot now.
No, I can't remember who else.
Yeah.
Is it Damien Hirst candy? That was on the corner in Oxford Street. And people then study, it was filled with candy and they just helped themselves and it's gradually going down.
It's not, but it's close. It's not Damien Hirst.
No, it's someone else.
But it is...
Matt Colshaw, not Matt Colshaw.
It's the guy called...
someone over here.
No.
Like, it's what?
No, it's an artist called Felix Gonzalez Torres. The principle's quite similar. I mean, in this photo, can you tell... I mean, this is obviously a photo, but in real life, if it was actually displayed, it would be as a pile in a corner or on the street or wherever the artist chooses. Would you? I mean, do you think you could? Anyone else know anything more about it before I give the game away? Actually,
Is it actually? I saw it as like a cone that you could walk round, but actually now looking again, it could be into a corner.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, so maybe. Okay.
But
Yeah, I think he has installed it in the middle of a room and also in a corner and in different galleries. But you can take them.
I think I read something about it that it was kind of controversial because it questioned if you can just replicate it or not, and if it's then still like the same kind of artwork and but maybe if, like, for example, I would put Kelly in the corner, it wouldn't be like Felix Gonzalez Torres or something. And I think it was like, I don't know, I think I read a lot about like, or with the influence, like, or in context of replication of contemporary art.
So whether you can just put it somewhere else and it have the same
value or
Do you mean that question around whether it is art at all, or whether kind of anyone could do it, kind of thing? Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Would people feel comfortable picking up one of these sweets? Who's the nose and who the?
I said no.
Why not? Why not?
Well, I don't know. If it's like a piece of artwork, and you always don't feel that you can go up and touch a piece of artwork. I mean, maybe if someone said, right, everyone go up and grab them, still might feel a bit self-conscious about it. Maybe you saw other people do it.
If they're on the floor on the street, I don't think I'd want to pick it up and eat it.
You wouldn't know what was in it though, would you?
No, I think it's some
But if you're a kid, you just would jump right in and swim.
My children would go and pick them up. They'd go in there. If they think it's sweet, they would go there and pick them up.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So children would probably be maybe more receptive and less inhibited by it, perhaps. Yeah.
And maybe it does depend on the context. So like you said, if it's in the street, no way. If it's in a gallery, I mean, does that shift it? If it's in a gallery, because that's difficult sometimes when you know if you can touch things.
I think if you see one person doing it and then not being in trouble, then the others follow. You know, it's someone just made personally.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, and I think that is a thing in a gallery. We do feel like you cannot touch. We're quite conditioned, actually, aren't we, to say that this is in a gallery. So you almost need a formal invitation. If that's the case, if that's what the artist wants, they almost need to let you know. Otherwise, you can't risk it. You just feel like, oh.
Okay, so one of the questions we've got on here is whether the title provides any clues or way into the artist's intention. Does anyone know what the title is? Okay, so the title is A Portrait of Ross in LA. Any ideas now? Does that change the reading, or is that just confused everybody?
Makes it like the idea. I don't know. This makes the idea. Maybe it makes the same idea. Is it that when Ross went to LA, there were loads of sweets or something, and they felt that's all they ate, or something like that.
So stereotypes of LA.
Yeah, I don't know. If sweets somewhere. I don't know. It would be some stereotype there.
Americans eat a lot of junk food, don't they? So they reflect that.
Yeah. I hope that was from LA.
Maybe then you also like don't only like characterize like the artwork on its own, like also maybe a character of the sweets, maybe to find like more clues about what it is like, and that's kind of weird. Like maybe Ross is somehow a sweet character.
Oh. Yeah, it's kind of it seems like quite an affectionate thing. Do you think that someone's portraying a person with a pile of sweets, or is it? I don't know.
The piece was made in 1991, if that's of any significance, originally, but it is still being reproduced today. Do you want me to tell you what the artist's intention was for this, yeah? Okay, so, so it's called A Portrait of Ross in LA. It is multicoloured sweets, candy wrappers. It's £175 in weight, and every time it's produced, it is kept to that exact weight. And Ross is the artist's partner, and his partner died of AIDS, and £175 was his ideal body weight before he got ill and his weight started deteriorating. So as people took the sweets, that was meant to represent, I suppose, his gradual decline in health. How's that changed the mood?
Will definitely make you less likely to take one. You're thinking of the person dying as you're taking it. Tasteless.
Oh, that's interesting. So even though it was the artist's intention that you should take them.
To say I want people to do things that represent him dying.
Yeah.
You think, well, I want to do that.
Oh, right, so there's that kind of discomfort that is brought in. That. Yeah.
Although they do get replenished at the end of every day. Yeah. Anyone else? Any other reactions to that? Or?
Yeah, I really thought it was all going to be about excess, and that's very interesting. That's completely taken that away. It's really changed it.
Yeah. I think it shows, I mean, one of the reasons we chose this one is really because it demonstrates that thing that you can come at a work with all these really interesting interpretations and ideas, and like we've seen, everyone's will be different. Yet what the artist is intending can be completely the opposite to that, and you may only find that out through talking to the artist. So sometimes in crits, artists can choose what they do and how it is that they present their work. So sometimes an artist might start a crit and they may deliberately talk about their piece. But that can have the effect of sometimes shutting down all of those readings that have just emerged there by doing that. Another strategy that an artist might take as a result of that is to not say anything and say, I just want your flat response to what it is I'm doing. And that might allow for them to be surprised by the responses. They can take some of those surprise responses and run with that idea instead. It might be something they haven't thought about. They might see something completely new, or it might mirror what it is that they were intending, and that can also be quite nice sometimes as well.
But there are times in an artwork where really, unless you know the background, you have to go with what you feel, and you have to allow that kind of openness. So to initially go with what you feel, but then if you want to find out more, then you kind of find out what the artist's intentions were. And it's kind of a very personal thing, whether you want that or not, or whether if you go in and see this and think, oh, that makes me feel so happy, and I'm just going to leave it at that because I love it, or, so, yeah, as I say, it really demonstrates, well, that kind of, the range of readings you can get, of which none of them are incorrect.
I was just going to say, this in a way is a kind of performance, isn't it? An interaction. So if you were seeing it in a gallery, you'd see people taking away. So that sort of gradual reduction.
Yeah. And obviously,
instead
a lot
of
more.
Static.
Absolutely, and so, it is quite hard for us to, we have got the photo, so we're talking about a photo, which is, you're that much distance from the work, so we're kind of expecting quite a lot of you to get into this, but yeah, exactly, yeah.
I think we did have another couple of images, but I think as a time we're just going to the next bit of the workshop, which is, we're just going to play a couple of minutes from the video that I mentioned earlier. Actually, I'll just do that, just talking.
You want to develop your artwork, so you show it to some people to find out how an audience perceives it, and what can be done to improve the piece. Often these situations happen on art and design courses, and this might be where you'll first encounter them, but they happen in lots of other places too, and the discussion of the work might take place in a location relevant to the piece you're showing. You could do it in your house, the park, by some water, or by the road. You could put your work up somewhere, disguise yourself, and listen into the conversation to find out what people really think. You could ask the group to write down their thoughts about the work, or get feedback over the internet. It's up to you. The size varies. It could be with 2, 10, 7, 50 or 23 people, sometimes even more. But the number of people can have an effect on how the group interacts with the artwork and with each other. If it's a small group, it's easy to get close to the work and have an intimate conversation, although you might not have a wide range of voices. With a bigger group, you're more likely to have a large scope of opinions and experiences when talking about the work, although it might be harder for less confident people to get involved in the discussion. So the way people interact with each other can change as the group size gets bigger. The format you use could change depending on what you want to learn. As the artist, you could remain silent, but listen carefully to what's being said by the group.
I'd like a slightly different format from the first two, in that I'd like you to talk about this for 10 minutes without my intervention, without my response. I'll be listening.
I think it's kind of role-playing of the being in a museum or gallery, because it's normally artist is not there, but people, viewers talk about the art or artwork or about the artist freely. It could be sometimes quite wrong.
Sometimes the work is not being read according to their intentions, and they have to consider what they might do in order to change that work, in order to make it read the way they wanted or intended. Or they might think, actually, the way it's being read is far more interesting than my initial intentions, and how do I develop that work?
I think by having that sense that an audience are then kind of invited to then speak at us, it almost saves us from then kind of jumping the gun and saying, oh, that was a work in progress, it didn't go quite to plan, and kind of trying to, what's the word for, when you're kind of trying to
validate,
yeah,
excuse
kind of excuse what has just happened, or to try and feed too much into the audience as like, well, this was about this and this and this. Yeah, it's more visceral, it's more raw kind of response of like, well, I didn't like that, or I didn't have a clue what that was going on, or I thought it was about this.
Unmediated.
Yeah.
This is really important, I think, how people just react without you justifying it and going, oh, but this, but did you know that we were trying to say this? And then they go, oh, maybe, okay, I won't make that point. And that's pointless, because you want them to make that point, because then you go, okay, that's how people are receiving it without us filling in those holes, plugging those holes.
You could give some details about the work at the beginning to give it some context. There might be some specific questions you'd like to ask the group, or the place where you're having the critique might not be where you intend for the work to be exhibited.
The next time I show it will be in an exhibition space with other projections and videos going on, and it will be in quite an inconspicuous, low-down space. It will just be there and you might happen across it.
Art develops, it has different needs at different stages of its development, and I think that sometimes a silent convener is absolutely appropriate, and other times students should actually say something very pointed about what they're doing.
That's just a very small section of the total hour-long crit video that's online, available on our website. And it addresses, there's different chapters and stuff, but I think just a couple of the issues that video brought up was, I think one of the things is try and get some critical distance on the work. So our work as artists is often really personal, and sometimes when we get feedback in a crit, we can feel like, especially if it's sort of criticism, you can sometimes feel like it's a personal thing. So it's really good to try and just distance yourself a little bit from the work. Also try and be open to themes that you may not have thought of before, rather than seeing it as a failure of the work. I think it's one of the speakers said, think about whether that might be an interesting way for the work to go. The other thing about crits that we've found is sometimes the way a conversation goes might be to do with the dominant figures in the room or the authority figure. So if you spot that happening, try not to fall into the trap of kind of saying, right, well, this person seems to know a lot about this. So even if someone says something about, oh, this is the proper reading of the work, or this, you know, it's fine to just go, well, I don't see that at all. This is what I get from it. And there is a little bit in that video where it's all students and staff talking there, and she kind of says, oh, well, maybe the reading of the work is wrong, and actually that's not how we see it. We see it's another reading, and it's not necessarily that it's wrong, it's that it may be not what the artist intended, which are two entirely different things, you know. So, and the other thing, if you're presenting, is maybe think about what kind of feedback you want. So, I think people mentioned, you know, you can have in the video, you might want to hear people, what people say about your work first. You might want people to write down what they thought and give it to you afterwards. You might just want to have an open chat. It might be work in progress, it might be finished work. The important thing is to kind of use the crit for what you want at the time with your work, really. And I suppose the only other thing is that talking about work isn't ever easy to start with. It was probably never easy. And maybe before presenting to a main crit, sometimes it can be useful to get just with a couple of friends who you feel quite comfortable with and kind of run through it. We've done other workshops where people have told us after they've done kind of little lunchtime crits where they might meet up with people, have a set amount of time, you know, we'll have 10 minutes each, talk about their work with people they feel comfortable with, just so you get into the habit of talking. Yeah. So
And
about
I think
practicing.
Yeah. And also I was just going to add to that, not to be afraid of silence, because I used to be terrified of silence. So if you show your work and people are silent for a little bit, that's fine. They would be, because they're thinking about it, and if, you know, and that's always a good thing. If they are, so a strategy you can use is to say to someone, you know, speak to the person next to you for a little bit, have a conversation about the work, and allow 5 minutes for that maybe, or maybe allow people to take notes for a few minutes, and then they come back later, because people take that time. And when Jo mentioned earlier about sometimes it might be a risk that people take work a bit personally, I think there was some responsibility from the audience to. One thing we were told at art school is not to use the word like so much. So if you say, oh, I like that, I don't like that, rather than just default to that word, maybe think, why is it that I don't like that? What is it making, like we said earlier, what is it making me think of? What is it making me feel? Or why is it I like that? What is it making me think of? What is it making me feel? And that can be a lot more helpful to the person and a lot more constructive.
Yeah, and asking questions, I suppose. If you think, oh, I don't like what they've used, I don't like those colours together, then, you know, you ask, why did you choose those colours? Why? You might prize a little bit more out of the work rather than, so don't be afraid to ask questions.
And talking of questions, before we end, does anyone have any questions? Or comments? Or not? Because if not, then we'll just have a quick couple of minute break, and then if anyone wants to join in the crit going outside, there's now going to be 3 artists presenting work. And we can take part in an actual crit.
Yeah, so it'd be brilliant if as many people stay as possible. Question.
Just one question. If you're looking for presenters for upcoming events, do you have to present actual artwork, or can you present an idea and, you know, concept and ask for people's input, or think either that you're crazy or whether it's a, you know, achievable, you know, concept?
Yeah, I think it's up to you. I mean, quite often people will bring an artwork in just because it gives people something concrete to focus on. But yeah, people have brought in ideas, and I think as long as they're clearly
constructed,
and spell out what they are, give people things to talk through, then yeah, that's absolutely fine.
It might be in the form of a sketchbook or something, but sometimes it. Yeah.
We've had all sorts. We've had people do dance in the prints as well and get an audience to respond. So it's not just
Yeah.
When you research your own work, what do you do with all the information that you collect after?
So once you've presented, what do you do? Well, one thing we say is, if you are presenting a crit, it can be a really good idea to get someone either to take notes, so you can note down all the advice that people have given throughout the crit, or maybe just bring like a sound recorder into the crit as well, so another way of remembering everything. Just some really useful stuff you don't want to think about it. Are you then talking about how you use it?
Yeah, then when you use those comments in like your next piece of work, or would you develop that piece, or would you, like, does that kind of inspire your next journey with your work? Or?
I think that would probably differ from person to person, and depending on what they're showing. So someone might show a piece, and the way it's being read might give them cause to challenge it, to change it to meet what they were trying to intend to communicate with the piece, or the feedback might make them see new avenues and go off and start a new piece of work and a completely new. I think it will be different depending on the person.
But that's also why it is really useful to either have someone taking notes or have it recorded, because it's amazing the difference between when you're standing up here and talking and people are asking you questions and you're like, and when you listen, like a week or two later, you listen back to it and you look at it and you think, I don't remember that at all. Or at the time when you're in that kind of slightly anxious state, you just hear things differently. So rather than make any hasty decisions, I'd say, give it time to sink in, look back again at what people said, and try not to be too kind of, it was, I've got to change everything. Just give yourself a little while to sort of just soak it in, because sometimes things come to you at the weird, like a week later you go, someone said that, and that was, so just...
Yeah, I suppose you can kind of choose whether you want to respond to that remark.
Most definitely, because sometimes a good thing about a crit is that it can, someone says, why don't you do this, and why don't you do that, and you can think, actually that was really helpful, because that's definitely what I don't want to do, and it can crystallise things in that way as well. You can really, someone will say, I have a really strong idea about it, and it can really help you know what you don't want to do as well as what you might want to do. So,
what's the benefit of attending a crit if you're not presenting?
So I think one is that it's a really good opportunity to see a huge variety of different artworks, whether or not you create work yourself or not. It's really interesting to see, a whole variety of practice. You also get to see where some of the artist's ideas are coming from. That can be really useful. So it can take it beyond that, just your interpretation. You get to interrogate the artist a little bit. I think you can, if you're going to a crit with a group of people, you can meet people that you perhaps haven't met before and have a dialogue with other people in the room, hear other people's opinions. Help me out yet?
I was going to say, I think one of the useful things is seeing that a lot of people have got very different views. And perhaps you've maybe discussed that work with somebody else and they've said, it's da-da-da-da-da. And then you get a room full and they all say 20 different things.
And I love that. That's what I like. I like it when you get the room kind of gets split sometimes, and some people are saying, no, this is really, really, and then someone else is saying, no, that's really, and it's really exciting when that happens, and you can kind of get down to all the nitty-gritty about what it might mean to someone, and how, it can be amazing that someone's got such a different view, but you can both exist in those spaces. Because that's what art is about, which is, so it's really, and I think being an artist is sometimes quite solitary. You're in your studio, and so it's a really, for me, it's just kind of getting out and talking to people, and people with the same interests. Because I know a lot of my friends at home are kind of, if I go into anything more than the colour or the shape, they'll just sort of say, what are you going on about? You know, so it's nice to have people who are just really into what they're doing, other people with similar interests.
I'm quite shy, so I'm wondering whether...
That's 2 questions though.
The statement. So what advice would you have for me to get involved in the crit and start asking questions?
Again, it's...
Do you know what, I think that is a... Sorry, I'll let it... But I was going to say, what I would say is something that Joe said earlier, like maybe do some practice crits if you've not taken part in them before. So maybe get together with a few other people and just have them on a smaller scale before you go into a larger scale crit. And then just literally just get used to speaking in smaller groups. I would also say there is a responsibility of the facilitator of the crit to bring in other people in the room and create an environment that is comfortable for people to come in, because not all environments are comfortable to do that in, we're aware. So I think both the shy person has a responsibility to go and practice, but also the facilitator has a responsibility. You want to add something?
Yeah, no, and it can, and there's no doubt it can be. You know, it does start off as quite a scary experience. We had an event last night with the QR team, and one of the girls there said, "Oh, I went to the first QR crit, and there was 100 people there," which and this was years ago, 2008.
Yeah.
And she really surprised me because she said I was scared to even sit in the audience, and I didn't expect, because she now talks quite freely. She's in the video, and she's, and I was really surprised that she said that. But I know I used to feel like that when I used to sit in the big crits, and I think I'll never be able to speak in front of these people. I will never be able. And when I think you go along, and if you enjoy that kind of interaction, you eventually can't keep quiet anymore. You're like, I'm going to say something about this now. It just takes time. It does take time to feel comfortable. Yeah.
Can I add to that? I'm the person who can't keep quiet. I think it helps to write down your thought or your question while you're sitting there listening. So you've actually got a few words written down, and if you stumble, you can check your words on your piece of paper.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also, I think it's easier to sit near the front, although the temptation is to sit at the back, because then you're sort of more connected to the sort of front bit.
Yeah.
What's happening here?
You can't see people behind you as well.
Yeah. If you sit sideways on like I am,
It helps because
so then you see the front and back.
Yeah.
Focus.
Okay, well, thank you to Sarah and Joe from QR. So.
Forms. If anyone has the time, just spend 5 minutes to tell us if we can improve anything or whatever. We'll give those out. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's completely fine. So we're going to move on. One thing I'm just going to say on the back of that, one thing that Shape are looking into is making crits accessible. So we've just started working with QArts to bring this event here, and hopefully we'll be bringing future crits where we can make it accessible. So accessibility is also really important for Shape. So that shouldn't put you off not going to a crit. One thing to do is always to ask the organisers what your access needs are and whether they can accommodate it. For instance, if they cannot accommodate it, then it's always good to come to Shape, which obviously that's our job, to try and make it accessible. And eventually there will be more events like this in the future. So again, I'll plug our mailing list once again. But do sign up for it, and that's open to not just disabled people, but non-disabled people as well. Okay, well, thank you all for coming, and we'll move on into the next one.
And thank you so much.
To be around at any time.
Yeah. Yeah. Fine. Cool.
Thank you guys so much. Well, it can't have been easy. Thank you.
Yeah, so we're just there's some drinks around there if you want to grab a drink, and non-related donations, that's fine to donate. But yeah, if you grab a drink, and then we'll have 10 minutes, toilets are just around there, and then we'll join the crit.
Great, thank you. And you can hand those forms in at any point during the evening to either me or Joe. That's fine. Or leave them on the table outside.